Welcome to Historic Horizons. We bring you amazing stories from history. Subscribe and enjoy the video. 5. Enslaved generations photographed on South Carolina plantation in 1862A. Rare photograph shows 5 generations of an enslaved family living under the same roof, a powerful reminder of how slavery controlled lives from birth to old age. Families were forced to remain in captivity across decades, passing the trauma of bondage from grandparents down to grandchildren. Ku Klux Klan gifted a radio to former slave Jack Riddle, 107, and wife Josie, 86. In 1923, the Ku Klux Klan publicly gave a radio to Jack Riddle and his wife as a so-called gift, but the act carried deep irony. While they posed as generous, the Klan continued spreading terror and violence against black families, using such acts to soften their hateful image. Photos of light-skinned enslaved children in New Orleans, 1863. In 1863, photographs of children who looked white but were legally enslaved shocked the public. These pictures highlighted the cruelty of the one-drop rule and helped inspire more support for schools and rights for freed African Americans. The bell rack in Alabama. 19th century slave owners used a cruel device called the bell rack, fastening it around a person's neck. When the enslaved tried to run through bushes or trees, the bell rang, exposing them and making escape almost impossible. Enslaved women caring for masters' children in Brazil. Late 1800s in Brazil, enslaved women were often forced to raise their masters' children as nannies and caregivers. They created close bonds with white children, but those same children grew up learning that the women they loved were considered property. Jessie. Aboriginal Australians chained in Wyndham Prison, 1902. In Western Australia, Aboriginal men were shackled in chains, as if they were animals. The colonial system used brutal punishment and imprisonment to break Indigenous resistance, leaving scars that still affect Aboriginal communities today. African Americans whipped in prison, 1889, although slavery had ended. In 1865, prisons became a new way to exploit black labor. Inmates, many arrested on minor or false charges, were whipped and forced into hard labor, keeping the system of oppression alive. Harvard professor Louis Agassiz photographs enslaved Africans, 1850. Louis Agassiz, a well-known Harvard professor, photographed enslaved Africans in South Carolina. He used these images to push false racial science that claimed Africans were inferior, giving so-called scientific cover to racism and slavery. Silas Chandler saves Andrew Chandler in the Civil War. 1860, Silas Chandler was enslaved, yet went to war with his owner, Andrew Chandler. During battle, Silas saved Andrew's life, and after the war, Andrew gave him land. Even in freedom, Silas stayed in the same region, respected for his bravery. Young boy punished with log in Zanzibar, 1890. In Zanzibar, a young enslaved boy was forced to hold a heavy log above his head as punishment. Such cruel treatment showed the harsh reality of slavery in East Africa. Even as the trade was ending, Union soldiers with contraband children, 1860, as during the Civil War, enslaved children who fled to Union lines were called contrabands. Many soldiers took them in, forming bonds and sometimes fighting for their rights after the war. British sailor frees Swahili slave in Oman. 1907, a British sailor cut the shackles off a Swahili man who had been chained for 3 years. This was part of the Royal Navy's effort to stop slave trading in the Indian Ocean. Sarah Breedlove. better known as Madam C.J. Walker, 1911, born to former slaves. Sarah Breedlove built a beauty empire and became the first self-made woman millionaire. In America, she used her wealth not only for business, but also to support education and civil rights for black communities. Slave ship victims during Atlantic crossings. 1700s 1800 slave ships. Millions of Africans were crammed into dark, filthy holds with little food or water. Disease and starvation killed around 2 million people before they even reached the Americas, making the Middle Passage one of history's greatest human tragedies. Slaves carrying elite men in Brazil. 1865 in Brazil. Upper-class men often used enslaved laborers as human carriers in sedan chairs. Even after much of the world was turning against slavery, Brazil continued to rely on enslaved people until it finally abolished slavery in 1888. Reward posters for runaway slaves in Kentucky. 1838 newspapers and posters offered cash rewards for the capture of enslaved people who escaped. These ads listed detailed descriptions of their appearance and skills, treating human beings as property to be hunted down. Lucy Higgs Nichols honored by Union veterans. 1898 Lucy Higgs Nichols escaped slavery and became a nurse for Union soldiers during the Civil War. Years later, she was made an honorary member of the Grand Army of the Republic, a rare recognition for a black woman in that era. Samuel Phillips Verner and African Pygmies. 1904 Samuel Verner brought Africans to the St. Louis World's Fair, claiming they were pygmies. Instead of respecting them, he displayed them as curiosities to satisfy racist fascination with African peoples. Arab slave trader captured off Mozambique. 1907A photograph shows a slave trader in chains aboard a British ship after being caught off the coast of Mozambique. Even decades after slavery was abolished in Europe, illegal trafficking continued in parts of Africa. Gordon's scourged back photograph. 1863, an escaped slave named Gordon showed his back, scarred with deep whip marks. 2 photographers. The image, widely printed in newspapers, gave the world undeniable evidence of slavery's brutality and fueled the abolitionist movement. Rebecca Felton becomes senator. 1922, Rebecca Felton became the first woman to serve in the U.S. Senate, but she was also the last senator who had owned slaves. She publicly supported white supremacy, showing how deeply racism remained tied to politics in the early 20th century. Branded slave with collar. 1800 Some enslaved people were branded with initials and forced to wear painful collars with spikes or bells. These cruel devices prevented escape and served as constant reminders of their owner's control. 4th, U.S. Colored Infantry. 1863, after Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, thousands of freedmen joined the Union Army. The 4th U.S. Colored Infantry was one of many regiments where black soldiers fought for freedom and proved their courage on the battlefield. Teenagers forced into convict labor in Florida. Late 1800s, after slavery ended, laws like vagrancy were used to. Arrest African American teenagers for almost anything. Once in prison, they were leased out as free labor to farms and companies, creating a new system of exploitation. Win Willis, photographed with slave horn. 1939, Win Willis, a man who had once been enslaved, was photographed holding the horn that called slaves to work. At over 100 years old, he remembered the days when that sound meant endless labor in the fields. Slave Anastacia forced to wear an iron mask. Brazil, 1800s. Anastacia, an enslaved woman in Brazil, was forced to wear an iron mask that blocked speech and made eating painful. Her suffering turned her into a symbol of resistance and the cruelty of slavery in South America. Enslaved Africans picking cotton in the US. 1800, cotton, called white gold, was the backbone of the Southern economy. Enslaved Africans worked long hours under armed overseers, picking cotton in brutal conditions that fueled America's wealth. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to leave a like to support our work and share your thoughts in the comments.